Yeah, my name is Derek Baker, and I'm an agricultural economist in the International Livestock Research Institute, which is based in Nairobi in Kenya. I was given the remit to talk about livestock farming in developing countries, an essential resource. Now, that is a huge subject, and I took the liberty of playing fast and loose with how I was going to define the topics to talk about and get through them today. So I sort of split it into three categories and thought I would say a few things about the livestock resource, more about what it does rather than what it is. So I don't have an inventory of all the numbers of camels and disease-carrying ticks and things that might be of interest to some. In terms of demand and markets, I wanted to bring that in firstly because this is a market section, but also because there's some peculiar aspects of livestock demand at the moment that have been emphasized here and that mean a lot for development in third world countries. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about deriving value in the developing world for livestock. And the reason I want to talk about that is because to a large degree in developing countries, the natural resource base for livestock production is already operating at its productive capacity. We're already in quite a lot of trouble in that part of the world with resource degradation due to livestock production and other land use practices. So basically, any further delivery of benefits from livestock is going to be through increases in productivity rather than increases in animal numbers, which has been the pattern up until the recent past. Now, I say delivery of benefits, and I come here to a term, better lives through livestock, which is basically what the development mission of my organization and a number of other similar organizations is by using livestock to deliver those benefits. And I wanted to talk about, instead of sort of what the value addition activities might be, I wanted to put them in the context of the information that is coming online and about the development activities that are taking place that would be of interest to industry in the developed world. And we'll just see how we go with my definition of what I'm talking about here. A word or two about the International Livestock Research Institute. It's part of an international consortium that has a number of other similar institutes around the world. ILRI is the only one that is dedicated to livestock. It is also the only one that is dedicated to the production system all the way through from the resource base through to the consumer and through to human nutrition and health. And my job in the institute is maintaining that interest in the entire value chain. ILRI itself, this is not the consortium, this is just ILRI, has 700 staff, 100 of which are research scientists. That depends a little on whether you define economists such as myself as a research scientist or not, and that's not a unanimous verdict in ILRI as yet, but I count myself around that 100. You can see we have offices in a number of countries throughout the developing world. We have a budget of around $60 million US for this year. That's typical for this period. Around about 90% of that is direct funding on projects which we implement with the funding partners and in association with other partners. And those partners are private sector, they're NGOs, they're philanthropies and development agencies, but particularly in the sort of the demand-based projects which I run, these are all private sector oriented projects. And ILRI's vision, I would paraphrase as better lives through livestock. Now, what is this livestock resource in developing countries? What does it do? And there's a map here, and sort of the more intense the brown color, the larger the number of animals that exist in those countries. But the truth is that around 600 million of the world's poor depend on livestock for a living. I can also tell you that almost all of those live in extreme poverty. And around about 150 million poor livestock keepers don't actually have access to land. So if one wants to use livestock as a vehicle to help the poor, it's kind of easy to find the poor, easier than if we were trying to locate them through land ownership or something like that. Now, I won't repeat the excellent presentations of yesterday, which had a lot to say about the nutritive value of meats in the diet. I did want to emphasize for those who don't know that livestock perform a large number of diverse functions in the developing world. In addition to generation of nutrition and incomes, they also provide draft power for agricultural activities. They produce manure, which is used in crops. They have social functions. They act as a reservoir of wealth. they are an asset, they yield a return, and so on. Many functions which, in fact, we're still learning about even at ILRI. And the one thing I would go back and emphasize with regard to diet here is that this term reliable, a reliable source of these nutrients. And this, to some extent, explains why a lot of developing country farmers are very reluctant to sell their animals. Year after year, they maintain a very large stock of animals, and many economists sort of question, well, why do they do that instead of selling them? Well, one of the reasons they do that is to preserve a measure of food security, and that's why I mention here a reliable source, a source which is always on hand of high-quality protein and nutrients and so on, which are available to the developing country families, which particularly in Africa involve a large proportion of young people, lactating mothers, young people going through years of puberty and so on, where there are particular dietary requirements that are met very efficiently by livestock. So I've said a little bit about these livestock systems, and I wanted to just illustrate one of the big changes which is taking place in Africa, and that has to do with land use. Here's an aerial photograph of a particular location in West Africa taken in 1966. What you're looking at there is open range land, no fences, no evidence of any cultivation. Those white lines you can see, those are from animals walking back and forth to grazing areas. Here's the same photograph taken between 30 and 40 years later of the identical location, and you can see that there's a lot of evidence of cropping, there's roads in there, there's fences, and so on. So things have changed considerably. This movement from a pastoral system to a mixed crop livestock system is very typical of a lot of developing countries, and we're seeing it more and more. Now, that has obvious implications for what livestock systems can and will do, but I also want to point out that it has a tremendous impact on what crop systems can do as well. And it was recently calculated that 50% of the world's cereal supply comes from mixed systems in developing countries. And livestock contribute to that, not only through manure and cultivation activities and so on, but also in the flexibility they introduce for people to work off the farm and a number of other things like generation of cash to buy seeds and fertilizer and so on. So we're dealing with integrated systems here increasingly, and pure pastoralism is moving very much to the periphery. Now, I hesitate to make sweeping statements about livestock systems in developing countries in comparison to those in developed countries, but there are a couple of generalizations I can make. First, the small-scale farm system, that is the so-called smallholder, that's prevalent and looks like being so for some time to come, and I have more to say about that. The enterprise form is diverse and has multiple objectives, in contrast to single operations as we observe in developed countries. The market destination overwhelmingly is local. Even where we're moving towards the world of one price, as I understand, even where local markets are well integrated with the international markets, the local markets are what smallholders serve. And those markets are overwhelmingly informal, that is, wet markets, local markets, not connected to the much-vamped supermarket revolution that has been to the fore in the middle-income countries. I just list a whole lot of aspects surrounding livestock systems in developing countries here, and the only comment I can make here is that there is a lot of diversity amongst all those types, and there is a lot of change going on with regard to all those factors that are there. And perhaps if people have direct questions, I can say more about that in my 20 minutes. I won't get the chance to. More generally, perhaps, people often ask me, so these livestock systems, are they a success or a failure? And I can make a few general statements backed up by empirical proof. Smallholder systems, for the most part, are competitive. That means that they can supply informal markets more profitably, more consistently, and more sustainably than can larger, well-organised farm systems. That's the good news. The bad news is that result relies to a large degree on the availability of extremely cheap labour. Once development takes hold and the smallholder farmer can actually earn more money off the farm, that result disappears and larger production systems become more competitive. The informal markets I talked about, they still serve the bulk of the very large number of poor consumers that are living in cities in the developing world. Those informal markets serve a large number of people with reasonable quality products, and they create a considerable amount of employment. A last point I would make is that those livestock systems, the smallholder and informal market livestock systems, they offer opportunities for investment, which people are increasingly taking, and they do yield a good return. The traditional development approach has been to establish something big, formalized, and looking familiar to the developed world and try to invest in that. The modern approach is to invest in these smaller systems and perhaps grow them into something larger and more formal. And anybody who's working in the developing world at the moment will observe the investment flowing into these smaller systems. So the good news I have is that the poor can achieve better lives through livestock. Let's think a bit about how. Now, the reason I want to talk a lot about demand is because most of you would be familiar with the concepts of the green revolution of the previous generation. That was based on improved crop cultivars, readily available high analysis fertilizers, improved irrigation, and innovations in crop extension. That was a supply-driven revolution. The livestock revolution is demand-driven. It's got nothing to do with supply drivers. It's demand-driven. Now, variations on this theme have been presented by various speakers over the last 2 days, so I don't want to go into it. The central idea here is that in the developing world, per capita consumption is increasing and is forecast to increase more. When that really bites, to coin a phrase, is when we look at the number of capita. I think capiti is probably the correct plural. When we look at the number of people involved and multiply it by the increased per capita consumption, we see that by 2050, developing country consumption is going to dwarf developed country consumption. So ideas that animals might be being sort of transferred to the developed world to serve markets en masse, is not going to work. I'd also point out that the 4 billion people living on incomes of under $10 a day represent an annual food marketing bill of nearly $3 trillion US. And that is where an awful lot of investment is going to serve, firstly, the top end of that market, eventually the middle of that market, and I think eventually the bottom end of that market as well. And I personally have a lot of examples to talk about that kind of investment coming into the developed world, much of it from other developing countries. Another question is, well, the people are there and they're consuming the product, but are they ready to pay for value-added product attributes? And we've done quite a body of work on that at ILRI, and I'll just hit a few indicative high points. We've actually just published a book on this at ILRI, which I'd be happy to distribute if people want to see it. Here we were asking consumers, what weight they attach to particular attributes, and the message is that there are particular attributes people are ready to pay a price premium for. Notably, they attach more weight here to those attributes than they do to price. Similar work in Ethiopia shows that not only does the same principle apply, but also it is extremely sensitive to income levels. And work in Kenya showed that, where we actually conducted experimental economics work and got at what people's willingness to pay is, we found people were very willing to pay for quality attributes. Now, there are 3 messages to take away from this. First message is, yes, people are ready to pay for value added. Secondly, doesn't this analysis just kind of mirror what we've found over the last 100 years in the developed world? Essentially, consumers have the same kind of aspirations in every market. And the third thing I wanted to say is the kind of attributes that people are looking for in the market are the kind of attributes that can be reasonably easily, reasonably cheaply supplied by smallholder producers. What we need is the coordination within the value chain. So, better lives through livestock also happens to be good business. Now, looking at the structure we've had of this Congress so far, where we talked about the environment, we talked about nutrition, and now we're talking about markets. At the risk of being accused of promoting silos, I just wanted to cover sort of much of the same ground with regard to the information that's being generated by my organisation and others regarding sort of investment opportunities and commercial trends in the developing world. And dealing first with market-driven change, we're looking a lot at trying to innovate in low-value livestock products. That is basically live animals being handed from trader to trader to trader to trader from remote areas into big cities. And we're employing modern supply chain management techniques to actually get economies of scale, to get improved synergy between species and between regions. And we're looking at possibly supplying into export markets, mainly for live animals across borders. And we're looking at sort of systems adaptations to change. So we're trying to get past problems like seasonality, particularly drought and so on. And we're employing a lot of modern techniques in that. In another context, what we've done is focused in on 6 or 7 very well-known value chains in 6 or 7 countries where we're actually monitoring all variables along the supply and value chain as closely as we can. And we're working with private sector partners to identify which kind of quality attributes we should be providing, how they should be provided, who's going to provide them, and what kind of package that looks like. And then once the packages are tested, we're handing them over to private sector suppliers. Working on the environment, we're pushing very hard on the themes that were mentioned yesterday in terms of the inverse relationship between productivity and greenhouse gas production.
Alex, sorry, 1 minute. Huh?
1 minute. Good. In particular, I'm interested in the greenhouse gas emissions per dollar earned in markets. In pastoral systems, we're working with private sector providers to look at delivery of particular services, particularly livestock insurance. In terms of technology, we're looking at drug delivery, drug development and drug delivery to overcome constraints on productivity. And we're using genomics heavily to look at, firstly, the genetic basis of the pathogens that cause disease and using that in vaccine development, and also looking at the genetic basis for disease resistance. In terms of improving human health and nutrition, we're looking at these informal markets which are largely unregulated, illegal in most countries, but actually supplying 80–90% of many consumer markets in big cities. And we're applying HACCP-style concepts to develop risk-based approaches to food safety and pushing that through into policy development as well. We've also got big programs on zoonoses related to food safety, of course, but also going back all the way to the farm level and looking carefully at the household basis for nutrition decisions and the management of the animals as they interact with those nutrition decisions. And the conclusion that I'd leave you with is that knowledge and the research and the delivery of that in partnership with private partners on those projects is what's really the key to delivering those better lives through livestock. And I'll leave you with those 3 conclusions, and I think my 21.5 minutes is up. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Derek. And now we are at the end of this morning's session. I believe we have had a very comprehensive and interesting session with some important outputs. The first, we understood also yesterday, we repeat today, we need production, we need the sustainable production, but first of all, we need profitable production, profitable for farmers, profitable for processors, otherwise there will be no production. The second, we understood that, and with the clear figures, how important the fifth fourth is for all production chain and how important for our industry is to be able to valorize each single part of the animals without any exception. Third, we understood how it's important to be able to take the opportunity that this market will give us in the different area of the world. So how is important sites for our industry, industrialization, and international presence. So we understood how and demonstrate how it's important to increase international trade and avoid any form of protectionism. We understood how important will be more and more in future any source of protein, any animal species, and any country where will be possible to produce meat. I'm very sorry because we are very late and the session this afternoon is absolutely very, very interesting, and so we don't have time for the question time. but I invite you through send mail to the organizer of the Congress or visiting the IMS website. IMS is a very, very interactive website today, so I invite you to put any question that you want through the website, and we will put you in contact with the speakers and we'll try to give you all the information. So I would like to thank again all the speakers of this morning, and first of all I would like to thank you for the patience and for the attention. Thank you very much. Now we will have, I'll give the floor to the President of the China Meat Association that will present the 20th World Meat Congress in Beijing.